On the line with us is Robert J. Smith, Senior Fellow with the National Center for Public Policy Research, a conservative think tank here in Washington, D.C. NationalCenter.org is the website. You can tweet him at National Center. And Robert Smith, welcome.
Good to be on, Tom.
Glad to have you with us. So the Bundy standoff is in some ways, and in fact, I would say that the guys who are doing the Bundy standoff have been informed by this movement that goes back to really to the late 19th century, but particularly to the 1970s with the so-called wise use movement of billionaires and large transnational corporations, particularly mining and lumber interests, trying to convince us all that the federal ownership of federal lands is a bad thing, and therefore we should turn those federal lands over to the billionaires and to these lumber and mining interests. I understand you support that position.
No, I do not think this has anything to do with billionaires or with large corporations.
Then why are think tanks,
landowners, the farmers, the ranchers, the miners, the timber harvesters, and so on, who settled the West and lived on the land and had their own homesteads and their own property, and they were isolated in a sea of federal lands as those territories in the West became states of the United States. And those states were not admitted to the Union on equal footing with all the other states. For instance, across the East, few states have more than about 4 or 5% of their land owned by the federal government. Iowa has only 0.5% of 1%. But you get to those 12 western states, and 90% of all the federal land in the country, which is about 1/3 of the total nation, is out there. I mean, you have a state like Nevada with 86% of the state owned by the federal government.
You ever flown over Nevada?
Pardon?
You ever flown over Nevada, Robert?
I've not only flown over, but you don't see anything. I've walked on it. I've been out.
See, there's no way that you could populate Nevada the way that you can populate Connecticut. It's mostly desert and mountain. The Shoshone, when they lived there before we came and stole it from them, had a population density of 100 people per square mile.
Right, but that has nothing to do with the problem. The problem is that the people who are out there are being treated like serfs.
Wait a minute, you right?
The land, they can't cross public land on traditional rights of way and trails that have been there since the 1800s. They get to a gate, and the gate has been new lock has been put on it by the BLM to harass the landowners so they can't move their cattle.
It's not to harass the landowners; it's to keep freeloaders out.
Well, these aren't freeloaders. These are people who settled the West.
They do not own that land. I own that land.
They're producing the food that you eat. They're producing the wood that goes into your home and into your furniture. They're producing the energy that you use. I mean, these are not people who are getting wealthy off.
They are welfare queen freeloaders. The Bundy boys are welfare queen freeloaders who are stealing federal property, and none of the groups that you listed, to the best of my knowledge, are hiring think tanks to write op-ed pieces promoting their ownership of the land. But we know that Koch Industries has been pushing for federal land privatization for a long time, or at least the Koch brothers. You're right. The federal government owns 85% of the state of Nevada and 64% of both Utah and Idaho, effectively making rural landowners little more than serfs. Now, I live in Washington, D.C., down in the southwest waterfront area, where probably most of the property around me, the big buildings and whatnot, are owned by billionaires. Does that make me a serf because I don't own all that land? They don't let me in either if I walk into somebody's building.
It's not billionaires. Again, it has to do with the federal government letting people use their land or trying to force them off their land or finding new ways to prevent them from using their land. No, it
has to do with the federal government protecting our common public space.
That's not the way that I look at it, and I don't think that's the way that most Americans look at it.
You don't believe in the commons.
You keep bringing commons end up the way they always do, as a tragedy. They're always misused and overused.
Well, Garrett Harding's op-ed, "The Tragedy of the Commons," was, I would say, a cautionary tale against privatizing land to the billionaires. The commons get sucked up by these greedy guys who are out here, funding think tanks and lobbying politicians.
I knew Garrett very well when he was living here in Washington before he passed away, and he said that the best way to resolve these issues that he saw so far was turning them into some sort of private property, so you had a person who owns something with the responsibility of taking care of it. A landowner does not overgraze his own land.
Of course they do. That's why they want to go on federal lands.
I mean everybody knows that. You take care of what you own. And when it's owned by everybody, nobody takes care of it. That's why you see.
Well, that's why we have the BLM, Robert. And when they're taking care of the land, you're saying that they're harassing the ranchers. They're taking care of the land.
Private forest owners, private timber owners, burning down their own forests? No, but this is what the federal government does. This is what
the Hammonds. You say first. It's important to clarify the Hammonds' crime in your op-ed. Most reporters note that they were prosecuted for arson on federal lands. You fail to note that they were poaching on federal land illegally. They set this fire to hide their crime, and in fact, one of the young guys who was with them laying down gasoline to ignite this fire on my land, on my land, had to hide in a stream in the water because the fire back flew against it. They nearly killed one of their own guys trying to conceal the evidence of their own crime. Number one, and number two, if you're concerned about the criminalization of all this and the 5-year minimum mandatory sentence under this terrorism act that these guys were convicted under, that was wholly a Republican project. The Republicans have been pushing for mandatory minimums for 3-4 decades since Reagan.
I think what you need to do is carefully read the transcript of the trial. All kinds of things were said, but the basic thing that happened was that they set backfires on their own land to prevent a wildfire that had started on public lands from coming down and burning down.
That was a separate incident.
Burning down their home, and also they were clearing invasive brush on their own land, as the government does on its land.
That was a separate incident from trying to cover up the poaching.
Events, burning a total of 140 acres. Now, if you think burning 140 acres of grass and sagebrush is the same thing as blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City, then I just don't think you understand what's going on.
No, Robert, I agree with you that law was poorly crafted and reflects the kind of hysteria that conservatives have been trying to inflict on this country ever since 9/11. Oh, we got to do something. We got to have more laws, more penalties. Rah, rah, rah. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that, taking these guys after they've served a reasonable, 6 months to 9 months in jail for committing arson and trying to conceal their own crime of poaching was reasonable. Dragging them back to prison for another 4 years to finish a minimum mandatory sentence, that's unreasonable. I agree. But if you want to do something about that, you need to be talking to Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, because it's the Republican Party that's pushing through these minimum mandatories.
Well, what I've been writing about and talking about is not necessarily the misjustice that happened to Hammonds, but what is happening with mismanagement of all those federal lands and what the government agencies are doing to try to force to keep harassing.
When I look at federal lands and then I look at the Anaconda copper mine,
the government.
When I look at the mining operations out west, where they're leaving behind these giant waste piles, you've got uranium tailing piles, you've got gold mining piles. The EPA tried to clean one up the other day, a couple months ago.
Out there polluting the waters,
right? Because Republicans had cut their budget to the point where they're hiring out a cheap contractor who didn't know how to do the damn job.
So the government's supposed to have expertise, and obviously it didn't.
Well, no, because Republicans have cut their budget. Robert J. Smith, Senior Fellow with the National Center for Public Policy Research, nationalcenter.org is the website. Tweet at National Center. Robert, thank you for dropping by.
Okay.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.